Being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
Welcome back to Fine Tooning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings on the industry you can regularly read over on The Wrap, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can listen to on the Light the Fuse podcast. He and I are recording this week's episode on Monday, October 21st. Now, mind you, Mr. Taylor won't be joining us till the second half of this podcast. Drew had a very busy weekend, which included moderating the Moana 2 panel at this year's Animation is Life event at the TCL Chinese Theater this past Saturday. And he and I just recorded the feature for this week's show, which discusses that presentation, which is where David Derrick Jr. and Jason Hand, who directed this upcoming Walt Disney Animation Studios release with Dana Ludo Miller, they talked about everything that went into creating the sequel to the original Moana from 2016. Anyway, you can hear that conversation between myself and Mr. Taylor on the second half of today's show. But first comes the news, and as always, the news portion of Fine Tuning is brought to you by TouringPlans.com. And if you're headed down to Central Florida anytime soon to sample some of the theme parks that can be found around the city beautiful, well, Touring Plans can help you save time. More importantly, it can help you save money as you wander around Walt Disney World or the Universal Orlando Resort. It's your call. So please check them out at TouringPlans.com. Okay, so let's start this week's news segment by talking about The Wild Robot's continued strength at the domestic box office. The DreamWorks animation production sold $10.1 million worth of tickets in North America this past weekend, which was good enough for The Wild Robot to come in second at the domestic box office behind Terrifier 3. By the way, third week this animated film has been in theaters. Also came in number 2 last week as well. North American ticket sales now stand at 102.4 million. Overseas ticket sales, 95.5 million. So we've got worldwide ticket sales just shy of $200 million at this point. By the way, just 19 days after the DreamWorks animation production debuted in theaters, The Wild Robot also became available on digital platforms to rent or own. This happened back on Tuesday, October 15th, and if you're like me, you're holding out for a physical copy of The Wild Robot. This DreamWorks animation film will become available for purchase on Blu-ray and 4K Ultra High Def on December 3rd, some 6 weeks from now. And speaking of things that will debut in December, Creature Commandos is set to debut on Max on Thursday, December 5th. And James Gunn, the director of the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, likewise the new CEO of DC Studios, he was at New York Comic Con this past Saturday to talk up this new animated series, which, based on the trailer that just got shared for this at that fan event down at the Javits Center, this animated series is a little bit like ABC's Lost. And Gunn explained that while the first episode of the show will show how this team of unlikely heroes came together, the subsequent episodes of Creature Commandos will then share something of the backstory for each of this team's members that will then shine a spotlight on how they got to where they are today, which is working with Amanda Waller, depending on day of the week, DC Baddie or DC Goodie, who has previously been performed in some of the DC studio films by Viola Davis, and James Gunn was reportedly thrilled that he persuaded this Oscar winner to come back and voice this character for this new animated series. And speaking of Creature Commandos voice cast, Walt Disney Animation Studios' Lucky Charm, Alan Tudyk, will be voicing Dr. Phosphorus on the show, and David Harbour of Stranger Things fame, and who also will be reprising his role as the Red Guardian in Marvel's Thunderbolts, which will be debuting in theaters May 2nd of next year, 2025. He's going to be voicing Frankenstein, which I thought was kind of an appropriate bit of casting news to learn just before Halloween. And speaking of Halloween, have you seen that new Simpsons short over on Disney Plus? Most Wonderful Time of the Year. It's directed by David Silverman. I have a tiny quibble. This one's a bit on the short side. Just 2 minutes and change. But on the other hand, we get Kelsey Grammer back as the voice of Sideshow Bob, and who then turns that Christmas classic into a celebration of spooky season. I have to admit, what I loved about Most Wonderful Time of Year, very update when it comes to Disney villains. If you watch in the background, you can see Catherine Hahn's Agatha Harkness from WandaVision, as well as Agatha all along. Likewise, there are Star Wars and Marvel villains, and also fun end credits where you get to see, for example, Captain Hook attacking Carl Fredrickssen's house from Up, Hook is using his hook to pop the balloons. Likewise, there's Homer as a circus lion tamer who finds himself dealing with Scar from Lion King and Shere Khan from A Jungle Book. But anyway, that new animated short debuted on that streaming service on October 11th. Meanwhile, over on Netflix, they too got a Halloween-themed offering. Garth Jennings and the team behind the Sing animated films over at Illuminations, they came up with a trick or treat as well. This is an 11-minute long show, basically 4 times the length of Most Wonderful Time of the Year, that pays tribute to Michael Jackson's Thriller, and this dropped on that streaming service back on October 15th, also well worth checking out. And speaking of Netflix, the new trailer for Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, dropped just last week. And this is also when we learned that Aardman's Latest will be showing up on that streaming service on January 3rd. I have to admit, I was somewhat disappointed to learn that this will be 10 days after this new feature-length project from Aardman. It debuts on Christmas Day, but I guess good things come to those who wait. Speaking of feature length, Vengeance Most Foul is an hour and 19 minutes long, which is 15 minutes shorter than Curse of the Were-Rabbit. That 2005 DreamWorks animation release was an hour and 34 minutes. So let's see, what else did we learn this past week? I was disappointed to learn that Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur has been canceled by the Disney Channel after just 2 seasons. This charming Disney television animation Marvel Studios collaboration first debuted back in February of 2023. We got 16 episodes in the first season. Season 2, which debuted back in February of this year, 2024, had 24 episodes. Kind of ironic, she loses her show, but Moon Girl is currently slated to do a crossover episode of Spidey and His Amazing Friends. That's supposed to drop on Disney Junior on November 15th as part of Season 3 of this aimed at the preschool crowd show. Speaking of which, not only has Spidey and His Amazing Friends already been renewed for Season 4, but Marvel Television Animation revealed that they've now got a companion aimed at the preschool crowd show in the works, and this one is going to be called Marvel's Iron Man and His Awesome Friends. And that will debut on Disney Plus and Disney Junior sometime in 2025. A spokesman from Marvel said that Marvel's Iron Man and His Awesome Friends is considered a key part of Marvel's expanded strategy to introduce its superhero characters to younger viewers. And one might argue that Lego Marvel Avengers Mission Demolition, the animated special that just debuted on Disney Plus this past week, on October 18th to be exact, is doing pretty much the same thing. Introducing the Marvel characters, or at the very least keeping them front of mind, with a slightly older crowd, in this case 6 to 10-year-olds. Before we close up the news segment here, I want to touch on a few quick things we talked about on previous Fine Tunings. I got to try the Krabby Patty collab meal at Wendy's. This is that limited time offering at that fast food chain, which is being done in honor of the 25th anniversary of SpongeBob SquarePants' debut on Nickelodeon. And the Krabby Patty, or at least Wendy's, the Wendy's version is basically one of Wendy's burgers with 2 slices of cheese, a tomato slice, a pickle, onions, with a dab of Krabby Kolob sauce, which, if I'm being honest here, it tasted a lot like Thousand Island dressing. And this Krabby Patty recreation was served on a toasted premium bun. And actually, this is where I think Wendy's aced it. The bun that the Krabby Patty, this Krabby Patty recreation is served on, literally looks like something out of a cartoon. It's big, it's round, and so again, I give them points. Let's see, we talked on last week's show about that stop motion Over the Garden Wall short that Aardman is creating to commemorate the 10th anniversary of that Emmy Award-winning animated miniseries, which debuted on Cartoon Network back in November of 2014. Early this week, got to see the stop-motion models for Wirt and Greg, the half-brothers, that story's built around. Likewise, Beatrice the Bluebird, and gotta say, they look really great. They're very much on model. And speaking of stop-motion, a movie that typically gets trotted out this time of year is Tim Burton's Corpse Bride, which was first released at theaters back in October of 2005. And if I'm being completely blunt here, this Warner Brothers release has never gotten the love and the attention that Nightmare Before Christmas has gotten over the past 30 years. But it looks like that may actually be changing. Now, a friend of the show, Nate B., was over at the Fort Wilderness Campground this past weekend to check out some of the Halloween decorations that folks who stay at this campground at Walt Disney World typically set up around their campsites. And by the way, this is a holiday tradition at Fort Wilderness, along with the Pargo Parade, where people decorate golf carts to look like various Halloween things. And the more elaborate, the better. And anyway, what Nate sent me video of this past weekend were of animatronic versions of Victor. And this thing was 6 feet tall and right on model for that character which Johnny Depp voiced in this directed by Mike Johnson movie, as well as Emily. And by the way, that's the name of this film's title character, the Corpse Bride, who was voiced in that stop motion film by Helena Bonham Carter. And that animatronic was 5'8" tall. I had to do some digging to find out where these great looking animatronics had come from. It turns out that the Spirit Halloween store chain had them available earlier this year for $349 each, or $800 for the pair. And sadly, for all you Corpse Bride fans out there, these excellent-looking animatronics seem to be sold out everywhere in North America right now. So hopefully they'll make another run of them for Halloween 2025. And speaking of animatronics, did you see that ad for RoboSen's living Buzz Lightyear animatronic? And holy cow. Mind you, they supposedly spent 3 years developing this 17.7-inch tall, 10.7-inch wide, totally programmable toy, which follows voice commands like record a mission log or scan the terrain. And now, what's kind of interesting about this is the second Buzz Lightyear animatronic toy that RoboSen has created. The first was built back in 2022 and keyed off of Angus MacLane's Lightyear movie, which was, as you recall, supposed to be the origin story for this Pixar character, and for my money, was a very entertaining film. I keep hoping that over time, Lightyear will get revisited by animation fans and then get the love that it deserves. Okay, now as for this second RoboSen Buzz Lightyear, which, by the way, officially licensed by Disney and Pixar, it's clearly modeled after the version of this Toy Story character that appeared in the first film of the series, which was released to theaters back in November of 1995. Now, given that this thing costs $600, I don't know if I'm going to find one under the Christmas tree this year. I wasn't nearly that good in 2024 to deserve that. But that said, you know what I'd like to find next to my Christmas tree this year is that 9-foot-tall animatronic version of the Bumble, the abominable snowman from the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer holiday special, which, by the way, debuted 60 years ago in December of 1964. Now, again, this one's pricey too. They're $498 a piece, but on the other hand, the Bumble has a gold star in his hand, which is, Cornelius would tell you, he can place on top of the tree without a ladder. So, thinking that I may need to sell a kidney so I can afford at least one of these things. And, speaking of Christmas trees, the trailer for An Almost Christmas Story, which is a fictionalized version of how, well, do you remember back in November of 2020, they found a tiny owl high up in that 70-foot tall Christmas tree that was being erected in Rockefeller Center? Well, the trailer for the holiday special version of this dropped the other day on Disney Plus. And by the way, this holiday special, which is directed by David Lowery, the trailer made it look charming. And just want to note that An Almost Christmas Story will be debuting on that streaming service on November 15th of this year. And speaking of November, in New York City, over the past 90 years, 4 members of the Fab Five, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Pluto, and Goofy, have all been turned into balloons for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Well, for this year's parade, the 5th member of that group, Minnie Mouse, finally gets her very own balloon. The 60-foot-tall inflatable will make her Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade debut on Thursday, November 27th. And I'm just saying, here's hoping we don't have to wait another 90 years before Daisy Duck then gets her balloon. Okay, and speaking of waiting, look, you've waited long enough to hear from Mr. Taylor this week, so why don't I shut down the news portion of this week's Fine Tooning so that we can then do a quick ad and then get to this week's feature, which is when Drew talks about the Animation It's Film Festival that was just held out in Hollywood and shares what he learned while moderating that event's Moana 2 panel. But first, this. And we're back. More to the point, Drew Taylor, who is the busiest man in entertainment journalism, is also back. Drew, nice to have you back.
Nice to be here, Jim. Thank you for squeezing me in this week. I appreciate it.
Oh, no. Again, just the fact that you're on the ground there, or were at Animation is Film, which, by the way, just want to remind folks, this was held at the TCL Chinese Theater October 18th through the 20th, and was presented by G Kids Annecy and Variety. And we're going to talk at length about a panel or a presentation you moderated. But first, you actually were a judge for some films that were being shown?
I was a jury member,
wow,
yes,
cool.
for the competition, 2024 feature competition.
Ooh.
Which was, it was a heavy burden, Jim, but I did it. No, I had a great time. It was really a lot of fun.
Okay.
We deliberated this morning for the winners, so I don't know if that's going to be public by the time this episode comes out. So I'm going to keep those to myself.
Okay.
But yeah, there were 6 movies
Mm-hmm.
that were part of the competition, including Flow, which is the Latvia's Oscar thing for their country, as well as an animated feature nominee, a likely nominee, I should say.
Okay, and
you've heard about this,
yeah,
right?
we talked about it previously on here on
Yeah.
Fine Tuning. I mean, the conceit is what humanity is the planet is flooding. Humanity has somehow disappeared, and it's a boatload of animals that have to work together to survive, so to speak. But they don't talk. I mean, this is basically a silent movie, isn't it?
The silent movie. It was done largely with Blender, which is kind of a free to use software. And it shares some kind of thematic similarities with Wild Robot, but is very much a different film.
No.
Really beautiful, great animation. Animals that are actual animals. They're not humans in animal suits. So that was one of them. Memoir of a Snail was another movie, Jim, which I know we've talked about on the show before.
Yeah,
which is great.
What did I see about that this weekend?
It won the BFI.
There we go.
Festival.
Yeah, no. I saw that coming out of London. Oh, very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And then, other things like The Colors Within, which is Naoko Yamada's new film, really beautiful. And one that I really loved, which is called Ghost Cat Anzu by Yoko Kuno and Nobushiro Yamashita. It's a French-Japanese co-production.
Oh, wow.
And it is absolutely wild. The animation is gorgeous. It's a better Beetlejuice movie than the Beetlejuice movie that was actually made this year. It's just a hoot. That's coming out from G Kids.
Okay.
Colors Within is also coming out from G Kids. Yeah. So it's been an absolutely astoundingly great year for animation.
Okay.
So
I'm so glad you got to sit on the jury for this, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of jealous you got to see all of that stuff. Holy cow! But
yes.
But among among Drew's other duties at this year's Animation and Film Festival, you moderated one of the more highly anticipated presentations at this year's event, which was behind the scenes Moana 2 panel. Held in Auditorium 3 this Saturday.
That's right.
In that venerable movie parlor. So you were there with directors David Derrick Jr. and Jason Hand, and this was an hour-long look at that Walt Disney Animation Studios release, which, by the way, due in theaters on November 27th, just 5 weeks and change. And did you see the story over the weekend about the projected box office? What it's expected?
No.
They're talking over the first 5 days, 100 million in domestic. So that would be supposedly a record breaker for Walt Disney Animation. But I guess the first 3 days of the Thanksgiving weekend, a solid at least 75 million. So obviously a lot of people are looking forward to this, or so say the folks at Fandango.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Before we get started here, a lot of the info I will be sharing or quizzing Drew about came from a write-up that Mike Celestino, who is Laughing Places lead Southern California reporter. This is coming from a story that he did. And by the way, I should also mention that Mike is the host of Laughing Place's own excellent Star Wars theme podcast, which has the title that I wish I came up with, Who's the Bosk? But just want to thank Mike using the info to quiz.
We love Mike. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So anyway, all right. So it starts off with Derek and Jason on stage, and they're talking about how did they go to Cal Arts at the same time? Did they meet there? Is that?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
That's where they met. Yeah. They're both about the same age. I think they're about 40.
Okay.
And yeah, it was a lot of the same footage. If you were at Annecy, it was a lot of the same footage, but very much more finished.
Okay.
I will say.
Okay.
So, and it was just a lot of fun to see that again. And yeah, I think this movie is going to be really, really good.
Well,
so,
but
yeah,
that's what's fascinating about this, because remember when this was first announced back in January of 2022. In fact, that's when we first learned that Derrick was coming on board to helm this thing. This was long form. This was effectively an animated series for Disney Plus, right? And
yeah,
and it wasn't.
Well, what was interesting with that, they said that they pitched Iger on turning it into a movie, which is interesting.
Oh.
Yeah, because I had always heard that the executives had started seeing footage and they were like, this could be a movie. But apparently they were the ones that were very much pushing for a big screen version.
But holy cow, Drew, that they only announced that this was going to theaters February 7th of this year. So, I mean, be careful what you wish for, because suddenly you got to have something ready for a theatrical release in, and what is that, 7 months? February to November? Oy.
Yeah. This was all hands on deck, literally.
Okay.
Jim, yeah.
And that's the other thing they mentioned. In fact, when they get to the Q&A portion of this thing, you were quizzing them about, this was actually made at 2 different animation studios. Is that correct?
Yeah, they used the Satellite Studio in Canada, which is run by the same guy that ran the Pixar Satellite Studio, which was up there as well.
Oh,
and
okay.
It had and it had Burbank churning at full capacity as well. So
holy,
this it's they say 1 studio, 2 locations. So
that's crazy. And
yeah,
to have it
3 directors. Dana Miller, who was the 3rd director, was not there because she's also writing the live-action Moana.
I was gonna
and was in Atlanta working on the production as we speak.
I was gonna ask about that because again, we found out that in April of 2023 that the live-action Moana was coming with Dwayne Johnson returning or going to play a live-action Maui. And it was only in June 12th of this year that, we found out that's coming out. Oh, what is it? July of 2026. So,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, poor Dana.
The sun never sets on the Moana Empire.
I guess so. But what was also kind of interesting, and I guess this came up during when you were quizzing the 2 directors, with you brought up, for example, this opens very, very differently from the first film, right? I mean,
yes.
Okay, and
yeah,
are we allowed to talk about the cold open?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the cold open is her kind of on this kind of Indiana Jones type quest with Pua in tow, and she's on an uninhabited island trying to figure out why their island is not, in communication and contact with other Polynesian islands. So thus begins our adventure, Jim.
Okay. Now, and okay, so just to be clear here, Moana 2 is supposed to take place 3 years after the original adventure. She's now 18 years old?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Okay, and did they talk about aging the characters up? Because what's funny is the only hint, for example, that Pua is aged is he's got the 1 tusk. Is that right?
Yes, he's got 1 tusk. Hey, looks like he's been refined a little bit.
Okay.
But Jim, you can't use the same model that you use because the workflows change so quickly. Yeah.
Well, it's so funny. They always have that conversation being, we can use the same old rigs. It's like, no, you can never use the same rig again.
I remember Kelsey Mann said it took over a year for the new emotion, like the new versions of the old emotions for their rigs to come in for Inside Out too.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay. So you were mentioning that again, a lot of the scenes that were shared were the same ones at Annecy, and they sort of laid down the general beats of the notion of, I guess. We don't want to give too much away here, but I guess Moana's about to officially become the wayfinder for her island. During the ceremony, there's some sort of there's a lightning strike, and we learn of the god of storms. Is that the big bad this time around?
Yeah, the god of storms, he's sort of obscuring an island that could be the kind of focal point to reach out to the other islands. He's kind of guarding the island that is the key to her traveling to other islands and meeting other cultures. So he is, and he has this scary woman that works for him who's made up of bats or controls bats or something. So yeah,
okay,
it's good.
Well, but that's the interesting thing is we also got that new 30-second clip that dropped, and we get a hint of how many monsters. Again, this is now. In fact, there's a lovely tagline at the end of the most recent ad where Maui's like, this has got me missing the lava monster, because
right.
we see. Well, you referenced in your talk with them, I guess when we meet the Kakamora again, they're being attacked by a giant, a Lovecraft-like monster of. It's a clam with tentacles, right? Or
yes, yeah. And then there's a Kakamora that joins the team, which I think is fun. So she's voyaging with all these people from her island, and then they pick up one of the Kakamora, the Moana of the Kakamora tribe, the son of the chieftain, goes along with her on her voyage, which I think is going to be fun and interesting. And they said that you're going to learn why the Kakamora are the way that they are. And so a lot of intriguing new details, a lot of lore, Jim. Yeah.
Well, now, speaking of which, and in fact, it's important to point out that Derrick and Jason both worked on the original Moana back in 2016. But
yes,
Derrick comes at this from a genuine and intriguing point of view, because he's got some Samoans in his family tree. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. He feels very connected to this story. He's got the tattoos. He's got the Maui style hair. I mean, just looking beautiful as always. And no, he this is a really important story for him. And they did the research like they always do. And Dana also has is Samoan as well. So
okay.
I think it's really cool. And they have it once again, Jim, the kind of oceanic story trust, many of whom were also advised on the first movie, which is pretty cool.
But at the same time, in fact, what I loved about Mike's coverage is they talked about how Derrick and Jason made a point of, for example, calling out that Eric Goldberg was back doing Mini Maui again, or for that matter, being very gracious about acknowledging that Ron Clements and John Musker initially set this in motion years and years ago. But again, you got to acknowledge Jared Bush, who was one of the directors of the original film.
Jared actually was not a director; he was just the writer on the original. He was doing
really?
Zootopia, yes.
Okay.
But Don Hall and Chris Williams were directors on
My
the first
mistake.
one. Yeah.
My mistake. You are correct. But again, what was the reaction from the folks in the room?
They were really excited. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing better than an animationist film crowd. They know so much. They're so enthusiastic. And they loved it. They really loved the footage. And they asked some great questions, I gotta say. And yeah, it was just a lovely afternoon. And then Derrick and Jason signed posters afterwards, which is so cool. So yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that nice?
I agree. In fact, wish I had made the effort to come out for this thing. It sounds amazing. Oh, and if only for the North American premiere of The Day the Earth Blew Up, the Looney Tunes movie, which, by the way, we just got word of when it's going to be released theatrically stateside. And I'm kind of disappointed that I have to wait till February 25th of next year to see this thing.
Well, Jim, there will be a Oscar qualifying run. So why don't you get your little butt into New York to watch it when that happens?
Okay.
Yeah.
Will do. All right.
Yeah.
Anything else worth noting from your animation is film experience?
No, I just love the festival so much. I love the people so much. But Jim, this is not the end of animation things happening in LA, is it?
God, no. I feel so bad for you in a way, because coming up this weekend at the Pasadena Convention Center is Lightbox Expo. That runs, October 25th through the 27th. And if anything, there's even more stuff you've got to cover there, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't have to cover anything. It would be more of me just going to enjoy myself, which is definitely an option because I love Lightbox so much.
Okay.
But I'm a little burnt out right now, and I also have AFI Fest is this weekend, Jim.
Oh God.
So, which includes the world premiere of a little movie, Jim, called Vengeance Most Foul on Sunday afternoon. So I will be attending that with my lovely bride. So yeah.
You are killing me. All right. Well, but this is also a polite way of saying, folks, it's very, very possible we're going to do the same damn thing next week. That Drew.
Yes, we will talk all about Vengeance Most Foul next week for sure. Okay.
More to the point that I'll handle the news and Drew will come in and do a great job with the feature. One news item I wanted you to comment on before we closed out here, because of course G Kids is one of the sponsors of Animation is Film. Did you see the news about Toho has acquired G Kids?
Yeah. This is really interesting. I actually wrote a piece for the wrap, so I'm going to plug that.
Okay.
But I was speculating that maybe this would mean fewer European movies getting released by G Kids or Toho or whatever they're going to call this new thing. But I was told that is not true, that they are still very committed to European and African and wherever else movies throughout the world. So that made me very happy.
Okay.
But to me, it feels like we're getting to a point where there's a lot of really strong interest in the West for Japanese animated features. We've seen Japanese animated features in the top 10 a few times this year.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, it seems like there's going to be a real face-off between Toho / G Kids and Crunchyroll for kind of the domestic anime title. So I'm very interested to see how that's going to play out.
And
yeah.
Let's be honest here, that's a good problem to have. Just that it means
yes.
more of this stuff on screens here in the States. And now I got to find a place playing Ghost Cat. That just sounds amazing. So.
I mean, Ghost Cat is really where it's at. I fought hard for Ghost Cat today when we were deliberating. He didn't. I don't think he made the cut, Jim. But I was fighting hard for Ghost Cat.
Okay.
Ghost Cat Anzu. It's out in November from G Kids, and it is a delight.
Okay.
So yes,
we will check it out. Okay. Well, again, thanks for making the time to drop in. And God,
of course.
I really wish I'd been there for the panel. It sounds like Derek and Jason put on a really good show with your help, of course. So, okay. Thanks again to Mr. Taylor for all of that great info on Moana 2, which again is arriving in theaters on November 27th. And speaking of great info from Drew, if you're not already listening to the Light Diffuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, which Mr. Taylor co-hosts with Charles Hood, you are missing out on some amazing behind-the-scenes stories. Not just about the Mission Impossible movies, but many other blockbusters. And this podcast, I got to tell you, folks, is definitely binge-worthy. And speaking of podcasts, I have a couple of them here at the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network we'd love for you to check out. We, of course, have Disney Dish, which I do with Len Testa. Likewise, there is the Epic Universal Podcast, which I do with Eric Hersey. We also have our Disney Merch Podcast, I Want That Too, which I do with Eric's lovely bride, Lauren Hersey. We just recently posted, finally, a brand new episode of Looking at Lucasfilm, which is the podcast I do with Brian Gunn. And let's see what else. Want to remind you also of the podcast that we host here at Jim Hill Media, and that's Manufacturing the Magic. That's the one that's produced by Noah and Shelley Valladolid and looks back at the history of themed entertainment. Also, want to be sure and mention Disney Unpacked, which is Lentesta and my project for Patreon. This is the video series with its companion podcast that we do with veteran Imagineer Jim Schul, and this month we're doing a show about the Equatorial Africa Pavilion that was almost built at Epcot Center back in the mid-1980s. And there's so much story here, folks, that we decided we were going to do a second video show, and this will touch on a specific aspect of that never-built World Showcase Pavilion, which is Africa Rediscovered, the movie that Roots author Alex Haley wrote for this project. Fascinating moment in Disney history. So anyway, beyond that, I want to express my thanks to Eric Hersey and David Gray for producing this podcast. Also, if I could ask a favor, if you could head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review, well, not just this show, Fine Tooning, but also Light the Fuse. That would be helpful. Let's see, beyond that, social media-wise, you can find Drew at Drew Tailored, like a tailored shirt. As for me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Jim Hill Media and over on Facebook at Jim Hill Media News. So, on behalf of Mr. Taylor, I want to thank you all for listening to this week's Fine Tuning, and we will be back soon.